بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين بالقاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وجعلنا منهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا لما صبروا وكانوا بآياتنا يوقنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Your second salawat for love of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. And the third for Sahibul Asr wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah. Our conversation over the past number of nights has been around the concept of aqaid and explaining and understanding the need for the fundamentals of our faith to build strength in our hearts to understand what are the principles of our faith. The concept we discussed about our holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, was that we mentioned that Allah sent him as a human being amongst human beings. That he was a man, that he was just a normal person. So as with all normal people, it was known that at some point in time, Khatmul Anbiya, the end of the prophets, will also die. Because he was a human being. So the question comes after that: how does Allah protect his faith amongst the people? How does the faith spread amongst the people? What is the position and responsibility of faith? Now, it was no condition to say, for example, and again, part of our discussion has to be around the intellectual aspects of the need for an imam, the need for a representative. Alaykum salam. It comes that we take a look and we realize, we see that, okay, fine, if the Prophet passed away 1400 years ago, the advancement of mankind, the social needs of mankind, the questions of mankind associated with faith didn't end 1400 years ago. There were still many questions that needed to be answered. There were still many things that needed to be clarified. So it was important that there should be someone who's in place after the passing of the Prophet who will be a representative amongst the people and answer their questions. For examples, we see, if we were to look at an example through fiqh, we would see the concept that we see in the Quran: Halallahu al-bay'a wa harramu al-riba. Allah has has permitted for you the sale of goods, but He has forbidden the taking of interest, of riba, on you. That it is impermissible for you to take interest. Yet we take a look and we see that many people still had questions. What does this concept of riba include? How is this concept of riba explained and structured, and so on and so forth? And there were some questions that even until after the time of the Prophet weren't clarified for us. For example, we see a conversation with Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, where he explains, he says, La yujad riba bayna walad wa waladihi. There's no riba, there's no interest. The transaction between a father and son, though you may think it is interest, it is not a transaction of interest, meaning it is permissible for a contract between a father and son to include the gaining of access from one from the other. Now this would appear contradictory to the verses of Quran had there not been someone to explain them and structure them for us. And in many cases we find that where we had questions or where we were uncertain about things, we required to have a resource available to us who could answer our questions, who could explain to us when something was unclear. Now the difference comes that all schools of thought accept this concept that we need to have someone who can explain to us the concept in the absence of the Prophet. The difference comes in who has the authority to explain it and who doesn't. For example, among some schools of thought, it's thought that any of the companions of the Prophet who spent time with the Prophet, they had the right and the ability to interpret the faith of Islam, and they had the right to present their opinion on the concepts of Islam. And then there is our school of thought that does not accept this concept, that says that it is necessary for the appointment of an imam to come from Allah, and for an imam to be sinless and flawless, it cannot make a mistake. Now, before we go further down this conversation, if you recite a salawat, I'll share a narration for you. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This question and the answering of this question of, is it necessary for an imam to be sinless? Is it necessary for an imam to be appointed by Allah? More specifically, is it important for an imam to be appointed by Allah? Is a question that is actually answered and discussed with our 12th Imam, Sahib al-Asr wa zaman. A questioner once came, and he came to ask our 11th Imam a question. But when he came to the countenance of our 11th Imam, and this is from a much longer hadith that's narrated, one of the questions that this questioner asks, alaykum assalam, and our 11th Imam directs him, he says, this son who is sitting in my lap, ask him your question and he will answer it for you. So the person asks our 12th Imam, he says, is it possible for people to select their own Khalifa, to select their own Imam, to select their own authority over them? Now, what you'll see is that there are similar conversations of where an Imam is sitting in the lap of one of the Imams, or he is sitting in the lap of his father. We see these similar conversations during the time of our first Imam, where he would introduce the second Imam. We see this conversation with the introduction of Imam Zainul Abidin. We see the similar conversation with the introduction of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. We see the similar conversation, Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Each of the Imams successively, as it was difficult for the people to understand who would be the Imam after the Imam. So for example, who would be the 6th Imam after the 5th? The Imam would make efforts to introduce the Imam to the Shia before he left the world. So we see a conversation where our 7th Imam is in the lap of his father, the 6th Imam, and he is announcing and reciting 40 miracles from our Prophet Rasulullah to show to the world that my authority is correct and I am the one who will guide you, and my authority, my knowledge is by divine inspiration, not by my choice. In this effort, we see this conversation where our 12th Imam is a child of maybe 4 years or 3 years sitting in the lap of his father when this questioner comes and asks about Imamat, and the Imam says, ask my son, he will tell you. And Sahib al-Asr, he goes, he says, okay, if you want to know why people can't elect their own Imam, then let me ask you, when they elect an Imam for themselves, would they select a good person or a bad person? Questioner says, obviously they would select a good person. Why would somebody select a bad person to be their Imam? So he says, okay, tell me then, what would happen if they selected a good person and he turned out later on to be a bad person? They selected someone on what he said, and he said all of the right things, but later on it turned out that he was actually a bad person. He says, maybe this is possible, but maybe it's not possible. Imam says, let me clarify for you in another instruction, another format. Let me ask you this. This is my Imam now. He says, tell me something. A Nabi, when he makes a selection, would he select a good person or a bad person? He says, of course, a Nabi, if he was to select, he would select a good person. And the Imam goes, see, here you are mistaken. Let me ask you about the situation of Nabi Musa. He says, Nabi Musa was given the command by Allah to select 70 people and bring them for the appointment of Allah. And we see this in the Quran when we look in Surah Isra. وَإِخْتَارَ مُوسَى قَوْمَهُ سَبْعِينَ رَجُلًا لِمِيقَاتِنَا. And Musa selected 70 of the men of his community to be our representatives. Here the Imam explains that Allah gave the choice to Nabi Musa, that Nabi Musa could pick 70 people to bring from amongst his qawm, and that Allah would appoint them as the leaders and would take an oath from them. So Nabi Musa went through his community, and he went through and he picked the eldest, the most respected, the leaders amongst his armies, the leaders amongst his masses, the one who when people said stand up, the whole community would stand up. And when they said sit down, the whole community would sit down. He selected these 70 people and said to them, come, Allah wishes to take an oath of allegiance from you. And our Imam explains, he says that when these 70 people came, what happened? When we look at the Quran, we look at the story of this, is that these 70 people, when they came for the appointment of Allah, they said very frankly, they said, oh Musa, we don't believe you. We will not believe in your God until we can see your God. And if we can't see your God, we will not accept because we think you are making this up. So it turned out that the 70 people that Nabi Musa selected of his own choice, even him as a Nabi, when it comes to his own knowledge, does not have the ability to differentiate and know what is in the hearts of people. So my Imam explains that if a Nabi can't know what's in the hearts of people, and a Nabi with his own knowledge doesn't have the ability to determine if someone is good or bad, then how can you tell me that people should have the ability to select their own Imam and they will select a righteous Imam? In this way we see the structure that our Imam is explaining. When it comes to the question of who can be your Imam, who can have authority over you, it can be no one except for someone who is appointed by Allah. And we see this in many instances when we take a look and we see the conversation of Allah in the Quran, where He points out to the various people who are given authority. Where we see, for example, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويأتون الزكاة وهم راكعون. And it continues, صل على محمد وآل محمد. It says, surely your guide, your wali is Allah, His Prophet, and those who have faith. And then the description comes, who are those who have faith? الذين يقيمون الصلاة, those who stand up for prayer. وَيَعْتُونَ الزَّكَاةِ, and they give zakat. وَهُمْ رَاكِعُونَ, and they are in the process of doing ruku. And we see and we take a look in history that there is no one who fits this qualification except for Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Salna ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Meaning the concept and the importance of imamat is such that even Allah mentions it repeatedly in the Quran. Allah mentions it and discusses it over and over again because it's important that there should be a guide present, that Allah did not send His message and then leave it alone. He put into position people of authority who have the responsibility to educate you and to teach you about your faith in the absence of the Prophet. And for us it's very important that we have certainty that one, this personality must be appointed by Allah, that two, his mention is not far from the Quran, that we have to come to that conclusion that this person is present, and that three, this person is the one who has authority over us. أَتِيُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَهُ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. Follow Allah, His Prophet, and those that have authority over you. Those that have authority over you, are they the people that we appoint and we select? Or are they the people that Allah selects and Allah appoints? In this aspect, when we come to the conclusion and understanding that we do not have the authority to select an individual to be our leader and to be the representative or to speak for Allah because we chose him, we recognize that an imam should now have certain characteristics. An imam should have certain countenances and personalities. And the most important of those that is important to us is that that imam should be sinless. That imam cannot make mistakes. In the same way we agreed that a Nabi who has the responsibility of bringing the message should not make mistakes when he brings the message, or should not be known as a person who has ever made a mistake. The same way the one who has the responsibility of explaining the message, teaching the message, and protecting the message must also have the same characteristic, that he cannot make a mistake. This is where the appointment of Allah becomes very important for us to understand, that it must be someone who is a sinless individual. Now, there exists a question and conversation that comes up very often about whether or not we hold the imams over prophets. Now, in this conversation, we have to structure our conversation correctly that we can understand it. First off, we have to come to the conclusion that one, the concept of imamat is not something new. The concept of imamat is something that existed before and was present before, and that, for example, Nabi Adam, from his offspring it was known, for example, Nabi Ibrahim was given the status of being imam, and that from his children would be an imam. قَالَ إِنِّي جَاعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا وَقَالَ وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي قَالُوا لَا يَنَالُ أَحَدِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Allah tells Nabi Ibrahim, He says, I have made you an imam for the people, meaning this concept of imamat pre-existed, and that a Nabi Nabi Ibrahim was already a prophet. He was raised to the status of an imam. The status of an imam was bestowed upon him later. So we see that the status of imamat is different from the status of nabuwat. Nabuwat has two categories, risalat and a nabi. A nabi is someone who has communication from Allah, who in his sleep can see the angels and receive their messages, and waking he can hear their voices. And he is responsible for usually a community or a group of people, or for a period of time, or for a location, and it is his responsibility to communicate those things which he receives from Allah. The next level is a Rasul. A Rasul is someone who can do everything a Nabi can do, and he is given a book that is then intended to be distributed to the people. So we see that all Rasul, all receivers of Risala are Anbiya, but not all Anbiya are receivers of books. So we see the level of a Rasul is raised above that. Next we see that amongst all of the Anbiya, there is one special prophet, who is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because this personality was given a message that was the completion of all messages, and was given a message that was for the whole world, for all of mankind from that day until the end of the world. So meaning he was not specifically for a people, he was not for just the Arab, he was not just for the Indo-Pak or for the Asian, he was for all of mankind, for all of people. His message was the largest message and the biggest message, and the completion of all messages. Therefore we see that the one who has the responsibility to teach his message and interpret his message must have the according status that he has the same access and information as that last prophet. So while it's true that an imam of the religion of Islam has to have a higher status than all of the Anbiya, because the message that he protects is higher than all of the Anbiya. However, it is not possible for an imam to have a higher status than the prophet who brought the message. To the extent when we see the conversations from the imams themselves, they were asked, who is the best amongst all of the imams? They say, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib is the best amongst all of us. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali. And every act of worship that we perform, its reward is sent, and its request is sent that Amir al-Mu'mineen should be the one who receives the credit for it, so that his status is continuously raising above and above and above us. Yet when you take a look and you talk to Amir al-Mu'mineen, you see what he says, and you ask Amir al-Mu'mineen, "Oh Ali ibn Abi Talib, do you find yourself to be equal to the Prophet? Is that what you are telling us?" He says, "No. Ana abdum min abid Rasulillah. I am a slave from amongst the slaves of the Holy Prophet." Sallallahu ala Muhammad. We see many different distinctions where if we look at intellectually, we never make the claim that Amir al-Mu'mineen can be higher or can be equal to the Prophet. Because he himself says, Rasulullah opened for me 1,000 doors of knowledge, from which another 1,000 doors of knowledge were opened for me. Meaning 1,000,000 doors of knowledge were opened for Amir al-Mu'mineen by who? By the Holy Prophet. Meaning there is nothing in the knowledge of Imam Ali except that it comes from the Holy Prophet. How can we say he is equal or superior to the Holy Prophet? Now, when we discuss Amir al-Mu'mineen, his fada'il, his discussion, his mention, and we liven his discussion amongst ourselves, this is because our Holy Prophet instructed us to discuss him. Because our Holy Prophet instructed us that this Ali is your litmus test. He is the one who will separate the people of heaven from the people of hell. He is the one, through his sacrifices for the religion of Islam, Allah has given him distinction. All of his distinction comes from the service and the support of Islam and our Holy Prophet. All of his superior statuses come from the support of our Holy Prophet. This is why the Prophet says, on me the people don't disagree. On me, everyone has agreement on. Islam and the secret of Islam and understanding where is Islam is finding that point of differentiation. And that point of differentiation is Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad. So we hold on to this point of differentiation, and we bring up the mention of this point of differentiation so that there is no confusion. That we are the followers of the true Sunnah, we are the followers of the true Shia, we are the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. This is why this conversation of the Fadail of Amir al-Mu'mineen becomes important. Not to say that he is superior to the Prophet, but the fact that through him we find the differentiation of what is the true Sunnah of the Prophet. What is the true knowledge of the Prophet? We have access to it. Because we see that our Imam was the one who was raised in the lap of the Holy Prophet. He was the one who spent his whole life with the Holy Prophet. He is the one who was there from the moment the Risalah began. He is the first one to pray behind the Prophet. He is the one through the victories of Badr, Uhud, Khandaq and Khaybar were given. And we see that he himself acknowledges that my superiority, my title in this world was that I am the victor of Khaybar. And when Amir al-Mu'mineen leaves this world, he says, now my title changes that I am the cupbearer, the cistern of Kawthar. Meaning Allah continued to elevate his status and personality. So for us, this is why this concept of imamat is important, because why? We need to have a clear source to refer our questions to. We need to have a source to determine where it is that the truth of Islam lies. Once we determine that, then we have to follow that source very closely, which is why the concept of imamat is central to Nabuwat. And this concept of imamat wasn't present just now. We see that Nabi Isa also had 12 apostles. We see that the various Anbiya also had representatives, where Allah has never left this earth without either His Nabi being present or a Khalifa being present on the earth, who is in authority of Allah on this earth. Therefore, how can we ever say that this is something new that came up now? How can we say that this is something different than what was existent within the world before? How can anyone make a claim that imamat, representative of Allah, is something that originated with us? No, it originated many years ago, generations and generations ago, with the various Anbiya. This is why the fadilat of Nabi Ibrahim is that he is considered an imam. And he asks, will they reach my family? Will my family also be from the imams? La yanalu ahd al-zalimin. This phrase is important because it says that yes, while it may be possible that Ibrahim from your generations will come the imams, none of them will be unjust. An imam can never be someone who is a dhalim, who is unjust, who makes a mistake. Even in this ayah we see the superiority of the Ahlul Bayt, that they must be the ones who are purified, a thorough purification. Where we see in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. اللَّهُمَّ صَلِّ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ. We see their other superiorities when we see our Holy Prophet say, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Not even the Prophet, Allah says. We see in the childhood of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain alayhimus salam, that we see a conversation where the Prophet is seen chasing after them in the streets and playing with them in the streets and picking them up and kissing them and loving them. And someone asks them, Ya Rasulullah, is this action from yourself? Is this your desire to show love to them? And the Prophet says, no, this is by the command of Allah that I show love to them, that these are a piece of me and they are the representatives after me. We'll end our discussion with a short joke, because even our Prophet used to share humor as well too. So this is a piece of humor from our Prophet. If you recite a salawat for me. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. An old woman once comes to our Holy Prophet, and she comes to him and she says, Ya Rasulullah, pray for me that I may be given permission to be in heaven. Pray for me. May I have permission to enter heaven? Our Prophet replies, he says, there will be no old people in heaven. Hearing this, the woman, she becomes very upset, very uncomfortable. And she begins to weep. And in her state of being upset and crying that the Prophet just told her she's an old woman, she can't enter heaven, she goes to Hazrat Bilal Hazrat Bilal, who is there, he sees her condition. He says, "Oh, old woman, why are you crying?" She says, "I just went to the Prophet, asked him to pray for me to go to heaven, and he told me there will be no old people in heaven." Hazrat Bilal says, "I'll go clarify, I'll go ask him." Hazrat Bilal goes to our Holy Prophet and he says to him, he says, "Ya Rasulullah, this woman came and she complained that you said to her there will be no old people in heaven." Rasulullah says, "That's correct, and there won't be any black people either." Hearing this, Hazrat Bilal becomes very upset too. And he starts to weep. And Rasulullah says, "Oh Bilal, relax, don't worry. My point in making this statement is, as at that point in time, the noor that is within you, Allah will show each of you through His noor, and each of you will be young and beautiful when you enter heaven." Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. So if each of us will be young and beautiful in heaven, and the noor of our heart will be the noor of our face at that point in time, this is why we see that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain are listed as Sayyidi Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And to finish on an even lighter note, there's a debate between some personalities where they say that, okay, we accept that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain will be the leaders of the youth of heaven, but then surely the first two khulafa will be the leaders of the old men in heaven. Inshallah, maybe they will be the leaders of the old men in heaven if there are any. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let's end our session by reciting Dua Faraj, inshallah, for the hastening of the last of the Imams, our Imam. And inshallah, may Allah hasten his dhuhr that we may meet him in our lifetimes. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma kun li waliyyika al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقاعدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.